Amara sat on a small wooden bench by the river, hugging her knees to her chest as she gazed into the rippling water. Sunlight shimmered on the river's surface, making it look like a bed of tiny diamonds, but she hardly noticed its beauty. Her mind was far away, wandering through the maze of her worries. She was tired of hearing the whispers and seeing the pity in people's eyes. She had just turned 30, and in her village that was the age when everyone started to say, if she's not married now, she might never marry. That was their cruel way of reminding her that she might soon reach menopause, a word that felt like a curse hanging over her head. Earlier that day, Amara had decided to make a trip to the village market to buy a few items: tomatoes, peppers, and a bit of smoked fish for her stew. As she walked, she tried to keep her head high, but she couldn't ignore two women who stood by the roadside, clearly gossiping about her. "Look at her," one woman said. "She's so pretty, but no man wants her. She'll soon reach menopause." The other woman responded in a hushed tone, "Maybe she's cursed. How can the most beautiful of her sisters be the only one left single?" Their words cut deep like a knife slicing into her heart. It wasn't the first time she had heard such talk, but it hurt every single time. She hurried on, pretending she hadn't heard them, but her eyes stung with tears. Her 3 sisters had all been married off years ago. People used to say it was just a matter of time before her own perfect suitor showed up. After all, she was the prettiest. Yet, here she was, older than she had ever imagined being, without a husband. Worse, she felt like the entire village was watching her every move. Finally, after finishing at the market, she went to the riverside to be alone. She placed her basket beside her and let her tears fall one by one into the flowing water. Her shoulders trembled as she cried, and her thoughts drifted to her parents' house. Her father and stepmother still complaining every day. "Amara, you're not getting any younger. Why don't you just accept whoever comes for you?" Or, "Amara, look at your sisters. They were all married 5 years ago. Doesn't that bother you?" She heard these words so often they echoed in her mind even when no one was speaking. She closed her eyes and spoke softly to the wind. "Oh God, when will all this stop? I can't bear the shame anymore. I don't have peace of mind. My parents complain about me, and now I'm the talk of the town." Her voice cracked as she remembered a particular memory, one that always made her heart ache. Years ago, she had known a young man named Dan. He was a hunter, strong and kind, with warm brown eyes that lit up whenever he saw her. Dan had loved her deeply, and she had felt the same. She truly had. Back then she was full of dreams, but also heavy responsibilities. She had lost her mother at a young age, and her stepmother made life very difficult for her and her 3 sisters. Amara, being the oldest daughter still at home, was forced to care for her sisters. Cooking, cleaning, taking them to school, it all fell on her shoulders. She loved them and never complained, but it also meant she was constantly busy. When Dan proposed, offering to take her away from her hardships, "Please, Amara, will you be my wife? Let's get married and start up our life together." She wanted to say yes, she truly did. But she looked at her 3 little sisters, so young, so helpless, and knew she couldn't leave them in the hands of her cruel stepmother. She answered, "Please, Dan, I am sorry. We are still very young, and I have 3 sisters to take care of. They need me. If I get married now, who will watch over them? Ever since my mother left us, our stepmother has made life worse for all of us." Dan had looked hurt, his eyes filled with disappointment. He pleaded with her, promising they could find a solution together, but she was resolute. In the end, Dan left, broken-hearted. Within a year, he married her friend, who was more than eager to accept his proposal, and that was the end of their love story. "Maybe I made a mistake," Amara whispered by the river, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Or maybe I did the right thing. I just wish I could turn back time sometimes." She thought about how all three of her sisters were now happily married, living in their own homes, raising children. And here she was, alone, feeling like she had made a sacrifice that ended up costing her everything. She inhaled sharply and decided it was time to return to her father's house. She couldn't hide by the river forever. On her walk home, she tried to keep her chin up and ignore the curious stares of neighbors. Once inside, she went straight to her room, laid down on her thin mat, and tried to sleep. However, the sound of her parents arguing seeped through the walls. She caught fragments of their conversation. "We need to find a husband for her. She's old enough to be having children by now." Their voices were tense, full of worry. The next day, Amara decided to fetch firewood from the farm. In her village, wood was still the main source of fuel for cooking, so it wasn't unusual for people to go into the nearby forest to collect it. She grabbed a small axe, a rope to bundle the wood, and set off alone. Sometimes, being among the trees felt peaceful. It gave her a chance to calm her mind. She took in the smell of damp earth, listened to the chirping birds, and tried to forget her troubles. As she was returning with a small bundle of wood balanced on her head, she noticed a figure in the distance, a tall, handsome man walking alone in the forest. He was dressed in clothes that didn't quite look like they were from her village. His skin was smooth, and his eyes seemed to shine even under the shade of the trees. She had never seen him before, and her curiosity was piqued. He noticed her at the same time, smiled warmly, and approached. "Hello, my name is Obina," he said, bowing slightly. His voice was smooth, almost musical. A shy grin spread across Amara's face as she responded, "I'm Amara. I haven't seen you around here before. Are you visiting someone?" She tried to sound casual, but her heart fluttered. She couldn't help but notice how attractive he was, and a little voice in her mind whispered, "Don't let this chance pass you by." Obina explained that he was just passing through, that he'd traveled from a faraway land on some sort of business. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press him. Desperate for marriage and also feeling the weight of the gossip, Amara invited him to walk with her. They chatted about small things, about the forest, the weather, about how difficult it could be living in a village where everyone watched your every move. By the time they reached the outskirts of her family's compound, she felt she had formed a connection with him. Or perhaps it was just wishful thinking, driven by her desperation to no longer be alone. Her father noticed her talking to this stranger and, surprisingly, did not chase him away. After all, the entire family was eager for her to find a husband. Over the next week, Obina visited often. He always seemed to appear out of nowhere, especially when she was alone. Sometimes he'd meet her by the river, other times near the forest edge. Once he even appeared by her doorstep early in the morning, just before she went to fetch water. She found his presence a bit strange. How did he always know where to find her? But she brushed aside her unease, telling herself that sometimes fate was just funny like that. As the days passed, Amara asked him where he was from. He simply smiled and said, "I come from a very faraway land, a place you wouldn't know." He never gave details about the name of his village or how he made money or who his family was. Instead, he would distract her with sweet words. "Amara, you are so beautiful. Your eyes sparkle like the stars. I want to take you with me when I go back." She knew she should probably ask more questions, but each time, her eagerness to be married overshadowed her caution. She felt her parents' eyes on her, and she saw her stepmother's sour expression whenever Obina was around. It was as though even her stepmother was uncertain about him. But Amara was beyond tired of her life as the village old maid. She convinced herself that any man would be better than no man at all. One evening, after Obina walked her home, he turned to her and said softly, "Amara, I'm going back to my land soon. You could come with me if you want." Her heart leapt. This was what she wanted, right? A chance to leave the village and the gossip, a chance to start fresh. "Take me with you," she whispered, her eyes shining with hope. "Of course," he said, "but only as my wife." She felt as though her heart would burst with joy. That night she lay in bed, unable to sleep because of her excitement. She imagined a wedding, children, a beautiful home somewhere far away from all the people who pitied and gossiped her. Within a few short days, Obina suggested they formalize their marriage. Her father, though slightly uneasy, agreed. Her stepmother was cautious, but also relieved. At least now they wouldn't have to worry about the shame of an unmarried daughter. Preparations began hastily, slaughtered a goat for the festivities, and brewed fresh palm wine. On the surface, it seemed like any other wedding in the village. Bright clothes, dancing, drumming, and families smiling for the couple. But beneath all this celebration, there were subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. For one, Obina and his people refused to taste any of the palm wine. Nor did he eat any of the food at his own marriage feast. He simply smiled and said politely, "Where I come from, we do not eat or drink on special occasions like this." A few people found that odd, especially a little child named Naza, a young boy about 6 years old who was known to be unusually perceptive. Naza cried out in the midst of the dancing, pointing at Obina. "Don't let her marry him," he shouted, tears in his eyes. "He's not a good man." Some laughed, thinking it was just a child's tantrum, while others looked uncomfortable. But no one really listened to Naza. They were too wrapped up in the idea of finally seeing Amara wed. Amara felt a strange flutter in her stomach when she heard the boy cry out, but she quickly buried her doubts. She was about to become a married woman, the one thing she had wanted for so long. When the ceremony was over, Amara kissed her father goodbye, waved to her stepmother, and turned toward her 3 younger sisters who had come for the wedding. Her sisters congratulated her. "Thank you for being our mother this past years. We wish you find everlasting joy and happiness in your new home," though. Each wore an uncertain smile. Something about Obina unsettled them, but none wanted to ruin Amara's day. In a swirl of colorful fabric and singing, Amara left the village with Obina and his people, heading toward an unfamiliar path that led deep into the forest. She told herself it was just a short route to get to his village, but the deeper they went, the darker the woods seemed to grow. She noticed that Obina walked silently, not even humming or making small talk. "Are we almost there?" she asked at one point, trying to break the tension. He turned to her with a cold smile. "Soon," was all he said. As night fell, she became aware that they were moving even deeper into unknown territory. What was supposed to be a short journey seemed to stretch on without end. One by one, figures began to disappear from behind the trees. They looked like men, but each one was ghostly pale, and their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Startled, Amara realized these were the same people who had come to the wedding with Obina, her husband's family, yet she hadn't noticed them leaving, or maybe they had always been there, lurking in the shadows. Her heart started pounding faster. "Obina, who are they?" she asked in a shaky voice. He did not reply. Instead, as they continued walking, some of the ghostly figures began disappearing into the thick undergrowth. Amara couldn't be sure if they simply slipped away or vanished into thin air. Her fear grew with each step. Then she noticed something even more horrifying. Obina's body seemed to be getting colder by the minute, as if some invisible chill were radiating from him. When she touched his arm, it felt like ice. At last, she could take it no longer. She gathered the courage to speak in a trembling voice. "My husband, please tell me the truth. Where exactly are you from?" He turned to face her, and his eyes looked so distant and eerie that she felt her entire body tense. His face was turning into skeleton. With a slow, cold smile, he replied, I am from Oduka, the land of the spirits. You are my wife, and now you are one of us." Her breath caught in her throat. "Uduka, the land of the spirits?" she murmured to herself. The words felt like a dagger piercing her soul. She tried not to scream. "Oh, no," she said. "What have I gotten myself into?